Hey everybody, we made it to season 23, which has no theme, so it's kind of a free-for-all. So hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, do whatever you want, just be safe. On May 10th, 2019, police in Delta Township, Michigan received a 911 call from a woman named Christina Miller reporting that her ex-boyfriend was harassing her. Most importantly, she had an order of protection against the man, which made his actions illegal. On top of that, the boyfriend was on parole, making his illegal activity even more serious. Police found him driving on the interstate out of town, and as soon as they had him in custody, he announced that the officers should look at his phone. He told them that on it would be pictures of two people he had just killed. This is Monsters. Kiernan Brown was born on April 5, 1992, and said that he lived in the area around Lansing, Michigan since he was 14 years old. When Kiernan was 19 years old, he was in the Crossroads program, which is a youth transitional housing program. There he told a counselor that he wanted to be the, quote, best serial killer people have ever seen. After that, he was involuntarily committed due to homicidal ideation. The specific details about that incident aren't known. Whatever happened, it didn't seem to alleviate his craving for violence. It looks like he did some time in 2013 for car theft, and then he was convicted of assault by strangulation at the end of 2014. The woman he had been dating at that time said that Kiernan told her that she wouldn't send him to jail and that he would kill her first. Fortunately, Kiernan was arrested and sent to prison before that could happen. 3.5 years later, he would end up being released on parole, and it seemed like he might have moved on with his life. He managed to stay out of trouble for a little while, attending welding classes at Lansing Community College. He began dating a woman named Christina, and the two ended up living together in an apartment in Delta Township, about 10 minutes west of downtown Lansing. He also had a job he worked on top of going to school. Of course, like many abusers, Kiernan couldn't seem to keep his hands off the women he was dating, and on May 5, 2019, he once again strangled his girlfriend, and at that point, Christina called the police. The following day, she secured an order of protection, and Kiernan was reported to his parole officer, who put out a warrant to bring him in for a parole violation. It wasn't like they had an all-out manhunt for Kiernan, though. They had a warrant to bring him in, but they weren't putting investigators onto the case to track him down. It wasn't until 4 days later that Kiernan returned to Christina's apartment and tried to talk to her. He sent her text messages, one of them reading, quote, "I can see you right now, but you can't see me. I'm out there if you look hard enough." Once the police were notified that Kiernan had also violated the protection order, they began the process of hunting him down so they could place him under arrest. Of course, as soon as he was in custody, he told the officers that he had pictures on his phone that he wanted to show them.
You guys should probably look on my phone on the camera.
Gotta be honest with you, dude. I don't care.
Well, it'll be the bodies of the two people I murdered tonight.
Okay.
The officer's first reaction was that he didn't need to see whatever the suspect was going to show him. It was reasonable to assume that it was something Kiernan thought could help his case, and the arresting officers are used to everyone they arrest proclaiming their innocence and having some excuse they think will get them sympathy. When Kiernan told them that it was pictures of two people he had killed, though, the officers changed their tune. They immediately read Kiernan his rights and confirmed he was giving them permission to look at his phone.
Where's his phone at?
Yeah, emergency to check it.
Yeah, he's saying he murdered two people.
Yeah, I also gave you consent.
Yeah.
He said he murdered two people?
That's what he said. He said to look at his phone on the camera. Oh, boy.
Jesus. What? He sure did. What the hell? Yeah, he murdered somebody. Is she pregnant? What's it saying?
I don't know, dude.
The officers found exactly what Kiernan said they would. They found pictures of a deceased woman lying in a motel bathtub covered in blood. There was some confusion as they only saw one picture and they thought the victim may have been pregnant, which is why he claimed to have murdered 2 people, but in reality they just hadn't scrolled back to see the pictures of the other victim. Once Kiernan was at the police station, detectives sat down with him and got all of the details about the crime. While that was happening, officers went to the 2 locations where Kiernan had told the arresting officers the 2 victims were. 32-year-old Julie Mooney was in room 215 at the Knights Inn Motel in East Lansing, and 26-year-old Kaylee Brock was at her apartment in Holt, about 15 minutes south of downtown Lansing. When police arrived at the motel, they found out that the room had been rented by Kiernan the previous Monday, which was May 6th. That lined up with the time he had been kicked out of Christina's apartment. Inside, they found Julie in the bathtub, dead from severe blunt force trauma to her head as well as multiple lacerations. At Kaylee's apartment, she was found dead in her bed with similar blunt force trauma and lacerations. Both women had several superficial lacerations on their bodies.
So what led you to Kaylee's apartment yesterday?
I just went over there.
Okay. She let you in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then what happened when you got inside?
I said we just talked.
You just talked?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What'd you guys talk about?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
Bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah. What led to the altercation that you had with her?
We didn't have an altercation.
No altercation?
Mm-mm.
What happened?
I don't know.
You don't know? What about Julie? Did you have an altercation with Julie?
No. No altercation.
When someone confesses to a crime, the investigators don't just take their word for it and stop questioning them. It may seem odd, but people make false confessions all the time. Some people are looking for the attention that comes from being responsible for a heinous crime. Others could be covering for someone else. Then, the person confessing might just be mentally ill. So investigators need to get as much detail as possible that matches the crime scenes to prove that they actually committed the crime. Specific details about how exactly the murder happened that only the person who committed the crime could know. It was clear pretty quickly that Kiernan was the one responsible for the murders. Obviously, the detectives first tried to understand why exactly Kiernan murdered the 2 women. An argument or some sort of unrequited love, but there wasn't any reason. Kiernan calmly explained that he just decided to kill them, believing there was some sort of darkness inside of himself.
Yeah, as you can tell, I got a lot wrong with me. But I guess it was too late.
That's an understatement. After watching the entire interrogation, Kiernan has a surprising level of self-awareness. He understands that he had dark thoughts and how harmful they could be, and it doesn't seem like he's just trying to set up an insanity plea. He describes trying to get help and not being successful, which is sadly a common tale. People who are suffering from mental illness report that they're having dark thoughts, but they get shrugged off and told it's no big deal. Or they run into financial issues when they can't pay for services, or availability issues when the healthcare system is overbooked. He told the investigators that Julie was actually assisting him to get help, but it seems as though he was beyond saving.
Tell me how you killed Kaylee.
With the hammer,
What the hammer look like?
some ball pen, point. You found it out when you arrested me.
Okay. We weren't there for that, so we don't know what's there yet, buddy. Where in her apartment did you kill her?
In her bedroom.
And there was no argument or altercation or anything?
No.
Just kind of snapped? Or was that what you thought you were going to do when you went there?
No altercation. It just happened.
Okay. What about Julie? What did you kill Julie with?
Same hammer.
So, did you kill Kaylee or Julie first?
Kaylee.
Kaylee, and then you drove to the hotel room?
Mm-hmm.
And did you call Julie over, or was she already there?
I called her over. She was on her way anyways.
Okay. You guys were just gonna kick it for the night? Yeah. Okay. Tell me about the hotel room when you got there with Julie. Did you guys just hang out for a little bit, or what happened?
Yeah, we just hung out.
Did you tell her about what you had done to Kaylee?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
So you and Julie are sitting in the hotel room. Did you took the hammer inside from the car?
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the hotel?
Mm-hmm.
And then what led to you killing Julie?
Nothing, lad. It's just, I don't know.
Where did you kill her?
I didn't want to do it, but, where did I kill her?
Yeah.
In the apartment.
Julie was in the motel room, right?
Right.
Where in the motel room?
She was in a bathtub, right?
Was she in a bathtub or on the floor? We haven't been there yet, but that's what we know.
She's on the floor. She was.
Did she take her clothes off?
I took her off.
You took them off? Was she already dead at that point?
I'm not real sure.
Okay. Is that hammer in your car now? Or is it in the hotel room?
It's in my car.
Is there anything else in your car?
Mm-mm.
Where's the knife?
What knife?
Did you use a knife at all?
Yeah.
What'd you do with the knife?
Should be in the car.
Okay. What'd you do with the knife?
It's in with the hammer.
No, what did you do with it when you were in the room in Kaylee's apartment and Julie's motel room? Were you stabbing them?
I cut off her head.
Do you know why?
Mm-mm.
Were they bad people?
No. I don't know about Kaylee. Julie wasn't. She was just trying to help me.
The timeline of events is a little confusing because it seems that Kiernan went back and forth between the apartment and the hotel room. He and the investigators determined that he had killed Kaylee sometime after 8 p.m. as the clock in one of the pictures he took showed it was about 8:45 p.m. Then, after spending some time sitting in the apartment looking at Kaylee's body, he took some pictures and then drove his own car to the Knights Inn in East Lansing. He wasn't there long before he said he was worried that Kaylee might not be dead, so he returned to her apartment. He said he went inside, didn't do anything else to Kaylee's body, then he drove back to the motel again. There, he called Julie over, killed her, and then took her car and drove it to Christina's apartment. On the way, he tossed both Kaylee and Julie's cell phones out of the car in an area he described as the corner of Saginaw and MLK near the McLaren Hospital, but on a map, that hospital is not near that intersection. I couldn't find confirmation of whether investigators found the phones or not. His reason for tossing the phones was in case someone called them, but I'm not quite sure why that would matter. It's not like they'd be able to answer. Maybe he still wasn't 100% sure they were dead. At Christina's apartment, he tried to get her to talk to him using language that could easily be interpreted as threatening. That was when she called the police at just after midnight on May 10th. Though he never really made it clear why, he said he wanted to go to Chicago, but instead of taking Julie's car, he returned to the motel, got his own car, and then headed west. It was a lucky break for the authorities because they were looking for a vehicle that matched his, not Julie's. If he had headed to Chicago in her car, he might have actually gotten away. Unfortunately for Kiernan, he was pulled over and taken into custody on Interstate 69 at about 3:30 a.m. When Kiernan's vehicle was searched, investigators found the hammer he had used to bludgeon both victims as well as 2 knives. All of the items had been cleaned, but forensic technicians were still able to find traces of blood on all of them. There was also a note with 4 women's names on it, 2 of which were Kaylee and Julie.
There you go, Ellie.
I think I would have killed her differently.
How do you think you would have done it?
Because she's the girl that I've always wanted to have sex with. You know, when I'm smoking hot girls.
Mm-hmm.
Always like, I didn't have that with Julie or Kaylee.
How do you think you would have done it differently?
I would have did it. I would have did it the same way. The initials and the lines and.
But you think you would have actually killed her differently, like not with a hammer? Or what do you mean by that?
There probably would have been no sexual component with her.
Ellie Ockley was another woman that Kiernan worked with who he had apparently fantasized about sexually. He said he would have done the initials on her, which is what some of the superficial cuts on Kaylee and Julie's bodies were. He had carved his initials into their skin because he had always wanted to be a serial killer, and I guess he watched too much television because it seems like he wanted to be hunted down and studied like he was on an episode of Criminal Minds. When the investigators asked him if he was going to keep killing people if he hadn't been caught, he claimed he just wanted to kill 4. He said 4 was easy.
Why was 4 your magic number that you wanted to get to?
It wasn't a magic number, but there's 4 people I had in mind.
Who was the 4th other than Ellie?
Jenny Webb,
Who?
this girl in my class.
What's her name?
Jenny, Jenni.
Webb?
Yeah.
She's in, you go to class at LCC, is that?
Mm-hmm.
Why her?
I don't know. I guess she wrestles with a lot of demons as well.
A woman in one of his classes at LCC, Jenny Webb, was the last person on his list of 4, and he claimed it wasn't personal. He told detectives that he didn't know why he picked those 4. He said he liked all of them and even pointed out that Julie was trying to help him. Except there did seem to be a pattern with the women he chose. Each time he spoke about the people he'd killed or planned to kill, he described the way each one of them was suffering. He said that Jenny had bad boyfriends, head trauma, PTSD, and had been addicted to drugs. He said she had been clean, but she still suffered. He listed similar situations for Kaylee, Julie, and Ellie. Interestingly, all 4 women's names ended with E. I hadn't realized that until just now when I said them out loud. So, did he think he was saving those people from suffering? He never outright said he had killed them to end their suffering, but it was clearly an important part of the situation to him. Police eventually checked on the condition of the other 2 women mentioned by Kiernan and found them both alive and well. One said she had received a text from him asking if he could sleep on her couch, and she had told him no. The other woman had received a text from him asking for a book for class, but she was asleep and didn't see the text until much later. She did say that if she had been awake, she would have met with him to give him the book. Obviously, Kiernan was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, and again, I think he was one of the few monsters who wasn't faking his mental health issues. He had clearly suffered from them for a long time, but the question was whether or not he was competent to stand trial and if he was sane enough to take responsibility for his actions. Doctors ended up determining that he was competent to stand trial, and further investigation would show that he was very aware of what he was doing. He had purchased the knives and hammer at a store earlier in the day on May 9th. A surveillance camera picked him up in the store during that purchase. That showed that he had planned the murders. The fact that he had contacted all 4 women, setting up opportunities to be alone with them, showed that he was clearly planning a killing spree. Despite those details, the prosecutor wasn't sure he could prove premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt, so he offered Kiernan a plea deal that would give him a sentence of 30 to 50 years in prison, but the judge rejected it in 2020, saying, quote, "In good conscience, I can't abide by this plea agreement." The family members of the victims obviously agreed with the judge. Kaylee Brock was remembered as a loving person. She had been diagnosed with pervasive development disorder, a condition on the autism spectrum. She had worked hard to get her high school diploma and found a part-time job and was proud to be living on her own. She had known Kiernan from her church. Julie Mooney was the mother of 2 daughters, and friends said she was always willing to help someone in need, the exact reason she went to see Kiernan the night she was murdered. He used her caring personality to lure her to her death, and he had planned to kill more women. He did not deserve to be released in 30 years. After 3 years of legal negotiations, Kieran Brown ended up pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 70 to 100 years in prison, making him eligible for parole when he's 100 years old. While in prison, Kiernan has had his entire face covered in tattoos, which is appropriate because it makes him look just like the monster that he is. Thanks so much for letting me tell you this story. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave a comment. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.